Thank you very much indeed, Mr Caton. I would like to start by welcoming this report from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and indeed congratulating the Honourable Member for Ilford South and all the members of the committee for producing such a rigorous and thorough report. The Chairman rightly pointed out that the situation with Russia is incredibly fast-moving, and as such, indeed, many new aspects to the international relations around Russia have indeed emerged, even since the publication of their report, and indeed even since the publication of the government's response only a few weeks ago. So it's particularly helpful that we've been able to have this debate today. I think we've had a very good debate, and I was intrigued by many of the contributions made by right honourable members, members of the committee, former members of the committee, and indeed some of those like me who are not members of the committee but perhaps feel slightly jealous that this must have been a particularly interesting inquiry to have taken part in. The Honourable Member for Thurrock early on in the debate mentioned that we might all end up being guilty of groupthink on this, and indeed there has been much consensus in the debate about the importance of Russia within the global sphere and indeed the UK's relationship with it. I think, however, perhaps some of the later contributions more colourfully have ensured that there was quite a range of views expressed, and perhaps we can't quite be accused of that groupthink scenario within this debate. I also welcomed the Chairman mentioning the context of this debate at the same time, obviously, as the NATO summit, and his remarks about the venue for the NATO summit. And it just brought to mind when I visited Bucharest and went around what is ironically called the People's Palace, when in fact it was nothing to do with anything for the people, but instead used one whole year of Romania's GDP to build, I think, what is rightly described as a monstrosity to fill Ceausescu's ego. And it doesn't surprise me that they're holding the NATO summit there, because it seems that they are actually just trying to work out anything to do with it. It is absolutely so vast that they don't know how to fill all of the rooms. But that obviously creates an important context for the debate, and I think it's been important that many members have stressed the importance of the links between Russia and the UK, and particularly between not just the countries but the people. And of course we have had over recent years a great number of Russians come to live in the UK, particularly in London, where of course they're contributing to society and to the British economy. But it's also true to say that in recent times there have been rising tensions between our country and Russia, and indeed internationally, and whether that's on the issues of energy security or Kosovo or the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. I particularly would like to endorse the recommendation of the committee that Europe does need to take a united approach to help to deal with these issues, and I also welcome the government's response in very much accepting that recommendation and endorsing that. Also, that surely has to be the right way forward for our country to be able to exert influence on Russia on those issues where we have found that there have been difficulties. There's been such a wide range of subjects covered that of course it's impossible to touch on everything, but I'd like to focus my remarks on the UK and Russia relations, on the issue of energy security, and then finally to turn to the issue of ballistic missile defence. Obviously, the relationship that we have with Russia is crucial, and we want it to be as constructive as possible. But there have, as I mentioned, been several incidents over recent years which have certainly challenged this. And it has already been mentioned, the events leading up to and perhaps more importantly subsequently to the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. And Russia's refusal to extradite Lugovoy to face charges has clearly led to a severe deterioration in relations. Now, the Honourable Member for Thurrock seemed to suggest that this situation had reached a stalemate, and it was very much obviously a still unresolved situation. And I would be interested to know from the Minister in his remarks whether he agrees that it's a stalemate, or whether in fact the government is still trying to take further steps to secure justice for Mr Litvinenko, and indeed for his widow, who is still living in Britain, because obviously it's I think, not acceptable to just leave that issue to one side when such a heinous crime has been committed on that individual, but indeed, as has also been mentioned, threatening the security of people within this city. Obviously, that led to the deterioration of the relationships, which led to the problems with the British Council. And I remember the statement which the Foreign Secretary gave in December and then updated in January. And all members from all sides of the House were obviously concerned about the bullying treatment meted out to British Council staff. And that has sadly, but necessarily, led to the closure of 2 of the British Council offices. I would agree with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that this action on Russia's part was totally unjustified and indeed illegal. And I think it's very sad when cultural organisations and institutions are brought into what are political disputes. And I would take the same view when people suggest that there should be an academic boycott on Israel. I think when there are political difficulties, actually it's through the cultural world that we perhaps should be working hardest to maintain links, so that we still have some relationship as a foundation on which to rebuild the political ties. So my question really for the Minister on this would be to get an update on the situation. Is it still expected that these offices that are closed will reopen? The suggestion that the lease on one of them had been given up is obviously concerning, and it would be interesting to know from the government when they think that might indeed be possible. I think while some members have cautioned against being too critical of Russia, I think on the issue of human rights there are very deep-seated concerns about the freedoms afforded to people within Russia. And one that I would particularly like to pick up on is the freedom of the media. Now, as honourable members within this House, we don't always find the media as a friend to us and don't necessarily always have a favourable opinion of it. But I think nonetheless we would all agree that a free media and a free press is a vital component of a free society. Even when they print things we might not like, it is important that they're like that rather than censored by the state. And that's why it's particularly troubling to see what's happened in Russia with, in 2006, the murder of the journalist Anna Politkovskaya, which I'm sure in Hansard will read perfectly, and indeed the suspicious death last year of Ivan Safronov. The investigations into these deaths were flawed. Apparently people have been charged with the former crime, but there hasn't been an update on what's actually happened. And I think this is just an example of one of the problems with oppression within Russia, and one of the barriers to creating a freer society. There was a very good Amnesty International report published last month, and I declare an interest as a member of Amnesty International, which outlined very well the difficulties that Russians face in their day-to-day lives, just in having freedoms that we would perhaps take for granted. But the Honourable Member for Spelthorne, I think, did make a very good point about this issue of human rights and how we're very quick to judge and condemn other countries. We talk about problems with elections, and when we see what happened in the Scottish elections in 2007, then perhaps it's easy also to see that we can have our own problems as well. Particularly on the human rights issue, though, I think that it is important that we look to our own house and try and put that in order. I wouldn't accept that we should not be fighting and campaigning for human rights in other countries until we have all of the human rights we want in this country. But that's, for example, one reason why I'm so concerned at the government's plans to extend pre-charge detention to 42 days, when at 28 days it's already one of the most longest in sort of any sort of democratic, civilised society. So I think we do have issues within our own country that we need to be aware of when we think about human rights abroad. But nonetheless, there are severe concerns about that situation within Russia. And indeed, the electoral process, which is not deemed to be fair and is free only to a certain extent, according to the monitors. Vladimir Putin is in some ways complying with the constitution by standing down as president, but clearly by putting himself in a position to become prime minister and then potentially have another go at running for the presidency in 2012, there is a situation that he's creating where he could potentially be holding the levers of power within Russia for more than 2 decades. And this is not something I think which we would necessarily regard as a healthy situation. I think in some ways it's too early days to tell yet what the outcome will be of the new president, Medvedev. because there's been quite a lot of conflicting views on this. Some people have suggested he might be more liberal simply because he doesn't have a Secret Service background, which in itself I suppose is quite shocking if you're described as a liberal just for not having been in the Secret Services. But there have been some positive words about what he has been saying, and I particularly refer to a briefing from the EU-Russia Centre where they said that he recently asked, what kind of equal opportunity and innovative thinking can there be if everybody knows that rights only belong to those with the sharpest teeth and not those that obey the law? Well, if indeed that is going to be indicative of the way he will act in position, then there may be some light at the end of the tunnel. And he is deemed to be a very capable and intelligent individual, and much as there has been speculation he will be under the thumb of Vladimir Putin, this may indeed not turn out to be true. At the same time, however, of course, having in some of his speeches described the British Council as spies and so on, I think there is obviously cause for concern as to how this will pan out. I think in reality, whether or not and what change this will lead to within Russia and UK relations, only time will tell as he takes up his post. But I think from the Foreign Office's point of view, clearly it's important that we are ready to engage, particularly if there is a shift and some positive steps taken by the new president. On the issue of energy security, it's been well covered by other members already, but I think it's important that the report highlights the mutual dependence of the energy market between Russia and the EU, and in fact that we are one of the least dependent on Russian gas supplies within the EU. Energy efficiency in Russia is a key challenge, and if we can work to help them improve that, that will go some way to reduce the pressure on the reducing supplies, and also indeed have some positive steps towards tackling climate change. And indeed we have the same problem that our oil and gas supplies are in decline, and so we certainly also have a highlighted need here to invest in not just energy efficiency, I would argue, but in renewable energy sources, and indeed to accelerate progress towards carbon capture and storage. I personally think that the pilot scheme being supported by the government to have a CCS plant up and running by 2014 is not quick enough, and that if we really want to tackle the climate crisis, that does need to be progressed much more quickly. And just turning finally to the issue of missile defence, this has been a huge source of tension between the UK and Russia, and indeed between the US and Russia, particularly our hosting of the facilities at Fylingdales and Menwith Hill. And people obviously have differing views on this. My view is that it's a hugely expensive and yet unproven technology with more than $100 billion already invested in it, set to rise to more than $150 billion in total over the next 5 years. And so it could just end up being a costly white elephant. Although, if the technology can be proven to work, and it was very well explained about the two different parabolas in terms of how difficult it would actually be to get it to work, it could have some benefits for the UK. However, what's very important is that this is done on a multilateral basis. And while it's welcome that there's been a slight thawing of relations between the US and the UK on this matter, the US and Russia on this matter, I think we must highlight that NATO should also be involving the other EU countries, as well as talking to Russia about this. But even while there's some people that are generally more in favour of the missile defence, and even on a bilateral basis, I find it difficult for anybody to justify the way the government has gone about this. On the 28th of February 2007, at Prime Minister's Questions, Tony Blair said on the issue when asked by my right honourable friend, the member for North East Fife, "I'm sure that we will have the discussion in the House and indeed outside the House. When we have a proposition to put, we will come back and put it." But yet on the 25th of July 2007, in the last days before the parliamentary recess, one of more than 40 written statements from the Secretary of State for Defence announced that Menwith Hill would become part of the US ballistic missile defence programme. So I would ask the Minister to reconsider and perhaps speak to the business managers and get them to devote some government time to debating this on the floor of the House, and indeed initiating a debate in the wider country about this issue. It's far too important for it to just be issued on a written statement at the end of the parliamentary year, and indeed I congratulate the Select Committee on coming to a similar conclusion. The fact that we had a debate on this in 2003, 5 years ago, when so much has happened since, is no excuse for us not having a debate now. So in conclusion, Mr Caton, I would just like to say this is an excellent report highlighting a variety of aspects of the important role Russia is playing within global security and the international stage, also showing what challenges we face. It's very timely that we're discussing it today, and I'm sure that many of the issues that have been raised, because they are changing rapidly, will be returned to in the future in this House, and I hope in particular that the Minister will add his support to returning to the issue of ballistic missile defence in a dedicated debate, in the words of Tony Blair, in this House and indeed outside this House.